dots on there. Right, I'm with you again. Sorry about that. That was a complete nightmare. I'm not the most technologically capable, and then got thrown by the delay on the webcam from what we were seeing. Okay, so I'm with you now. I will just run over what I talked about before. Obviously, you've just worked out that making videos isn't my strong point, but I can definitely share some stuff with you about creating spaniel ears. So I'm working on dark grey pastel mat. This is made by Clairefontaine, and it's a originally created for pastels. Obviously, you can tell that by the name, but it works really, really nicely with coloured pencil and allows a huge amount of layers, and so you can really build some depth and tone in your work. It's one of my favourite papers. It's the one I go to the most, especially when I have a really sort of textured surface that I want to create. So on here I have no, Northern, it definitely wasn't you, it was me. I kept getting all these messages saying that everything was working perfectly, but it wasn't quite. And now I've got a message saying please check the video resolution, so if it looks okay, can you let me know? The next one will go smoothly, I'm sure. Okay, so working on Clairefontaine Pastelmat. Pencils I'm using for this morning are Faber Castell Polychromos. So these are the pencils I would recommend to everybody starting out. They're really good quality, professional quality, a really nice range of colours. You can buy them in sets or you can buy them open stock, and they're easily available, and they're probably about half the price of, say, Derwent Lightfast and Luminance as well. Is the Derwent Lightfast I've just mentioned, Caran d'Ache, Pablo's, Caran d'Ache Luminance as well are all pencils I'd use, but if you're starting you don't need them. These are a really good place to start, and some artists use these exclusively, they don't actually do any other brands. Okay, so Spaniel Hair is very thick, wavy and silky, and what you're looking to do is capture the movement and the depth of the fur rather than getting too hung up on all the little details. There are obviously, you know, every artist has their own little way of working, and there are many different approaches, but I just want to share with you how I do it. But even in saying that, I haven't got a real 100% set method. Every time I look at a piece of work, I will maybe do things a little differently, depending on what that particular piece of work needs. But by having lots of sort of solutions already thought out in my head, by practicing little things like this, gives you a head start and makes you feel a bit more confident. Brilliant, thank you. I will not worry about the resolution if it's looking okay. What a nightmare, eh? That got my blood pressure up a bit. Okay, so what I've started to do, I've basically with graphite, I've done a drawing on a separate piece of paper. With graphite, I've just used traced down paper, so it's just a sheet of graphite paper, to just get a very, very faint outline, just giving a hint of the direction of the fur. So I don't draw freehand directly onto the pastel mat, because when you draw a line on the pastel mat, you're going to put an indent in that paper, and if you want to erase or lift off, it's going to make it a lot more challenging. And indenting is actually a way of creating texture, so you want to sort of avoid doing that unless you really need to. So the graphite paper gives a really fine line. If it gets a bit smudgy, or there's, sometimes you get odd blotches, just get, this is a bit of a mutilated putty rubber, just get a soft rubber and you can just dab it off, and you see there, it just takes off some of the lines. They're a little bit heavy, so it just gives you a really light guide. And how much information you want to put down in that initial drawing is really a matter of choice. I just really like to have the basic structure in place, know where the eyes are, and that's it. I don't need to put different changes of fur and things like that on my line drawings, but say everybody's different, so whatever you need to put down in that drawing, do whatever makes you feel comfortable. So I'm just going to And feel free to ask questions as well. And if you're watching this on replay, if I manage to save it afterwards, after my disasters first thing, then just pop something in the comments and I'll come back later and answer it for you. So what I've got here, I'm going to start to build the values. So the values, if you're not sure, are basically the lights and the darks of your image. If you were to change it to a black and white photo, that would be pure values, no colour or chroma in there at all. So I'm just basically, the grey of the paper is giving me a nice mid-tone, so I'm just at this stage starting to map out the darker areas. So I'm using really, really light pressure just to start to build up varying hairs. And I'm not slavishly copying the photo, because you would be there for about 1,000 years, I think, trying to get every tiny little hair exactly right. Giving more the general impression and really observing how the hair moves and trying to imitate that in your work. And I'm not worrying about the fine little details at the moment either. That'll be something that I look at later. You think of it as you're building layers. So this is basically your base structure. So this is your, if you're making a cake, this would be your bulk ingredients like your flour and your eggs and things, not your icing. Just going to make it look pretty, and it's what everyone sees on top. This is all the rough stuff underneath. It's going to make it delicious in the end. So it's really just building it slowly. And if you're new to pencils, this is a really good way of getting confident with how they work. Just doing little samples of this. You can do all different sorts of hair. And if I'm doing, say, a commission of an animal or something that I've never done before and I'm really not sure how that works, then I'll do something like this. I'll just practice that particular texture until I'm happy, rather than experiment on the final piece and then wish I hadn't. There we go. So you see already, I haven't done a lot, but already you're getting a sense of movement through the paper. Yes, I have got a reference photo. It's on my, I might have it, yeah, I've got it printed out actually. It's a little bit darker, but oops. Working from an iPad. I like using an iPad because I can really zoom in on areas if I need to, but I have, this is a very dark photocopy. I printed, you can see there. Sorry, I've got a bit of a delay on the screen I'm seeing. But, point, is it coming up? I'll keep going. So it's, so the image on my iPad, which is reflecting the light, I can't really stick it in the camera. But I'm just looking at, say, these really dark areas. These are the areas I'm trying to map out straight away. So it just gives me form and structure. It's like the skeleton of the image. See all around these sorts of areas. So that's looking okay, that's fine. Okay. Yeah, and this one is the walnut brown. Thank you for asking the questions, you remind me. Got slightly bamboozled by the failure with the technology, so just shout if there are things you need to know. And by the next time I do one, I will be completely au fait with how it all works. I'm sure. Famous last words. Okay, so I'm just thinking about mapping those, and I'm not I'm casting an eye at my reference, but I'm not being massively fussy. And the thing is with Pastelmat, because it takes so many layers, if you're very light in how you apply those layers, you just keep working over the top. So if I've got something a bit wrong, I can address it later on by layering on top of it, rather than having to erase back to sort of untouched paper. There we go, and I'm just looking here. But it is really, it's obviously you can't see me, but I'm flicking my eyes backwards continually to the reference. So being able to draw and create realistic work is a huge amount about observation. What are you actually seeing? I think we can sometimes, when we're drawing, get a little fixated on what's under our pencil or our paint, and you forget to look. So you're drawing what you think is there rather than what you're actually seeing. So, there we go. Just seeing where it curves. So I think I'm drawing the shadows in here. Already you've got that movement starting to happen, although it's very sort of early stages. There we go. It's coming out as scratchy as it sounds. So I will show you, that's saying about erasing, I'll show you when I've got a few more layers down, a really nifty little way of taking some of the pigment off if you decide you really do need to lighten an area. But say Pastelmat is very good at allowing you to address your errors, which is fantastic. Here we go. See that lovely wavy swirl as it comes across the page, the image I should say. Spaniel, I've got a spaniel, so I do love drawing spaniels, so it's always a real treat to have one as a commission piece. But their hair can be a challenge, especially if you haven't got great photos. And actually that's another thing, if you are doing portraits for people and the photo's a bit sort of dull or out of focus, then knowing a little bit about how the fur and having a technique for how that fur really works together already can really help you create a realistic work. There we go. And you can probably hear my husband shouting in the background, which is also helpful. Never mind. Here we go. So that gives a real basic look. And that's with mid dark brown, the walnut brown. So then I just want to get the dark sepia, which is the darkest brown that I'm using. Then I'm just going to focus on the so I'm looking at my reference again. Looking at my reference, this isn't the best, you know, I'm working with the one I'm working off is a little clearer, this is a bit dull, but where are the real darkest points? Again, if you're not sure, you can turn your photo black and white. If you've got a smartphone, take the colour out, or take a photocopy if it's an actual photo, and just where is it really black, and those are the bits I'm going to pull out and illustrate now. So, and this is what will give your hair depth. And there are many different ways of creating animal fur, and I think every artist, even if we all use pencils and we all work on Pastelmat, you all have your own little unique ways of doing it, which is what makes our art unique. It's one of the things I love is, you know, you give a room the same reference, the same colours and the same image to draw. Everybody's work looks different. It's all captures something of you in there as well. I just want to, so where are the darkest points? And it's the values that will really give your work structure. I will tell him that he needs to be quiet next time. Well, I did tell him this time, actually, he's just forgotten. There you go. Be back at work soon, hopefully, then I will be a lot quieter when I do these things. Good. So it's quite easy to feel you've got to go in. My tendency is I start to put too much of the real dark in, but if you're really selective about the point really dark, it just helps balance out your drawing. There we go. I'm just flicking backwards and forwards the reference. Where are the dark points? Have I captured them? Oh, there's another bit over there that maybe could be a little bit darker. And you can see already it's, you know, haven't taken me very long. I haven't put a lot of pencil on the paper. Already getting that sense of movement, and that's what you're really looking for. If you get the movement and the values right, it will matter less about being able to put every tiny little hair detail in. And if you get too caught up with like the top layer, the icing, which are those tiny little details, your work can start to look quite rigid, and it looks like an exercise in drawing lines as opposed to capturing that, you know, essence of the animal. You think about, you know, think of art history and people like the Impressionists, Post-Impressionists, who can, you know, capture huge amounts of movement and light, and they're certainly not drawing every little detail. When you get close to those pictures, they're really quite thick, heavy paint. As I say, you don't need every tiny little hair, which makes it easier in the long run. Okay, so I'm happy with that as the first stage, and that I would say is basically I've set my values, I've created the structure of the piece I'm doing. Yes, so at this point I'm only looking for the darkest points of the work, just creating the depth. And what's the next question? How many layers? Looking at least half a dozen, usually double that. Different colours will fill different colours of paper a little bit more quickly or not. If you put a lighter colour on top of the darker colours of Pastelmat, say an ivory or a white, you'll probably start to see more texture come through again, and it is just a matter of just keep working through. But Pastelmat can take an awful lot of layers, and my natural preference is to use a lot of layers, so I really like this paper because I can just keep going until I get that real saturation of colour that I'm looking for. And it also, layers also allowed you to I should work as I talk, shouldn't I? Also allow you to have real subtleties, because pencils are translucent. All the undertones and the undercolours will really show through, even if they're not what you see on the top. Okay, so the next step is I want to put some of the lighter values in. So the paper is becoming the mid-tone. I've added the dark tones, and now I want to put the highlights, the brightest parts. So I'm looking at my reference again. I'll pop that underneath. Look at my reference, and this is actually where the photo of here that I'm showing you is actually quite dark. This is actually quite a good illustration of this, because this really shows you, like, this is a light point, these are light points coming through there, just where the hairs are hitting the light as it goes through. That's what I just want to bring out in this one. So this is the ivory, and it's going to be a little bit yellow, but we'll address it and I'll show you another of the beautiful things about Pastelmat. So I'm just, you can see how this actually looks a bit more textured, where it's a lighter colour on top of the darker colour. Just, I'm not covering all of it, I'm just thinking hairs and highlights. And you'll add far more highlights. This is going to get covered over, but it will become clear. So, this way. There we go. Again, this is also helping give a little sense of movement, because obviously the highlighted areas are looking closer to the eye and the darker areas are receding. There we go. There we go. You can just bring the lighter colours over the dark. Looking good already. you know, and how finished and polished you want your surface to look. I like it to look really smooth. Well, I like to lose the texture paper. It's really up to you. Well, my dog's trying to get in the door. It's really not going well this morning. Never mind. Bless him. I think Woody would have done a better job at setting this up this morning than me. Still, it's all a learning experience and you learn by making mistakes. So next time, as I say, it will be perfect. There we go. So that is looking, bringing the hairs, looking a little bit better. Good. So we've got a little bit more movement. I'm just checking, is there a couple more areas? Again, don't get too carried away. You need to cover every bit of the surface. And at this point, you can look at your values again. I think actually, you know what? I maybe want this to be a little bit darker. So I can just pop my darks in. Sometimes we're putting, you know, values are all relative to each other. So put a few more lights in and you'll think, oh, actually that dark does need to be a bit darker. So just going to darken a couple of these bits. And there's no, you know, one size fits all technique. It is just a matter of having lots of different solutions and then basically using your best guess to start with, experimenting. And every piece I do, I think, teaches me something new. It's a fascinating way of spending your time. Okay, so just put a few more darks in. Actually, yes, this would really relate to human hair, wouldn't it? I say I don't tend to draw people. I'm always worried I'm going to be too realistic and offend somebody. But yeah, this would work really well. You're not drawing hair, you're drawing shape. So the yellow, looking at the colour of my reference, the ivory is looking too yellow. So I'm just going to, this is the Light Flesh, which I believe has actually changed name now with Polly's, because the Light Flesh is quite an ugly name. So it's a very pale pink and quite a yellowy pink, but I just want to, these ivories say is quite stark and quite yellow, so I want to just give a bit more of an orange tint to it. So I'm going to glaze. The glazing is when I've got a really sharp point and I'm holding the pencil, you can see, right at the end and sort of on the side. So I'm putting really, really light pressure and just backwards and forwards. You can see it's just taking a little bit of the pigment. It's not hugely covering it, but it's just turning the yellow to slightly more orange. So unlike with paint, you'll mix your colours on your palette before you apply them. With coloured pencil, you tend to mix your, well, you do mix your colours actually on the paper. So, you know, the pencils have a good range of colour, but you'd not, you know, there's only 120. So there are obviously far more colours in existence than we're actually going to have ready-made for us. So understanding a little bit about colour mixing will help you too. Knowing, you know, the components of your colours, that just gives it a little bit. Okay, this is really subtle. It's not a huge change, but it will help give a bit more harmony to the overall look. Yeah, I tend to, with the colours of the Pastelmat, I will use the dark grey for most of the textured animally colours, and if I want maybe a smoother look or I'm going to have a white background, then I use the white Pastelmat. I don't tend to use any of the other colours. I'm not personally that keen on coloured backgrounds when it's just the paper. I'll put coloured backgrounds when I have a play with my pan pastels and things, but say that's not to say you can't use that. It's just my preference. Cool. The one thing that's working well is the chat, actually. It's quite good to see everybody's questions and comments, so Something we got right this morning. Okay, so that's my next step. Stop fiddling. And basically I have to establish the values. It's a bit rough looking, but it gives you the idea that that is hair and it has movement. If I want to darken a colour, do I recommend using the colour wheel opposite or adding greys or darker tones? Both. You can do both. And it would really depend on just looking really closely at the reference and also what sort of tone, as in, do you want everything to do you want all your, how can I put this? If you want your work to look harmonious, everything's on the same part of the colour wheel, then I'd go with that. If you want to make it look more vibrant, then you're going to start to use complementaries and go opposites. And I tend to only, if I'm going to darken with black, I tend to only wait to the very, very darkest points. I won't use a lot of black and equally a lot of white. I try and just pick out the real lightest points to use black and white to darken. And yes, I do always have a scrap of paper. I don't experiment. If I'm not sure about a colour or even a technique, I'll practice it before I go on my actual finished piece. It's not worth, you know, spending hours on something, because colour pencil is really slow. You don't want to spend a couple of days on something and then mess it up because you've got the colour wrong or it's not looking quite right. So everybody's questions answered, isn't it? Yes. So next step, this is establishing the values. So I've basically created the structure, the skeleton of the work. Now I'm going to start to add colour. So it's a sort of pinky chestnut spaniel ear. So I'm just basically going to glaze over the whole image. I'm not going to try and draw the hairs. Glaze in the way that I did with the orange over the whole of the, it's just a backwards and forwards technique. Again, I'm holding down the end of the pencil and applying with the side of the pencil. Just so I can give a nice, it's like a colour wash, but with pencil. And just turn the pencil as well. As I'm going, every couple of marks, I'm just rotating so I keep a sharp edge against the pastel mat. And that prevents you having to keep sharpening and putting all your expensive precious pencils in a pot. I just want it to be even. See how it's all just sort of blending together? And you don't, by using lots of layering, you don't need to physically blend with like blending pencils or OMS, the odorless mineral solvents. I do say I'll never use those things, but with Pastelmat I very rarely feel the need to add anything to artificially blend them. It is all just a matter of layering. You see, it's very textured at the moment. There's a lot more layers to go, but it is all starting to and you'll start to see, you'll start to add, and you'll see the values will get a little flat, so we will add in the values and rearrange again before we finish, but that's fine, that's to be expected at this point. I said before, how smooth you actually want that finish, how much of the texture you want to lose is a personal preference. Texture can look quite nice with some things, and I love it when people do a piece where there's one part of the image which is really, really ultra polished and finished, and then gradually it sort of fades out into sort of looser work. I always think those look really nice. Again, a very quick layer, and I'm just going back over. Glazing is burnt sienna. Sorry, I don't think I said that. I just said it's a chestnut, or it's chestnut ear. This is probably one of my most used colours doing animals. So many horses are bays and chestnuts, and it's just a really nice reddish brown, natural looking reddish brown. Okay, so you can still see a lot of the paper texture through, but that for most part it's mainly the first layer to be expected, so don't worry. And this is what people will think of as the ugly stage as well. It looks pretty crude, and quite often people can get a little bit disconcerted because they're looking at what they're producing and then looking at what they've seen produced, you know, on Facebook or whatever, and wondering why their finish isn't as nice. And it's basically you just need to do more layers. There's only really 3 or 4 layers so far. There we go. Right, I think I've answered everybody's question. I'm just having to look to the side, so if I miss your question I will try and get back to it. If I do miss anything I'll answer it in the comments underneath. So now I want to start to, I've given a glaze of colour to sort of harmonise the whole thing, and now I want to start to build the richness of the colour. So one colour I really like is a Caput Mortem Violet. It's a sort of purpley pinky brown, and I'm not going to go over the lightest areas, but now I'm sort of drawing a little bit more hair strokes, following the direction of the hair. Like with the glazing layer I just went flat across the whole thing. Now I'm going to think more about how the hair grows, but I'm not going to cover the lightest areas. I'm just going to sort of blend in, and I'm still keeping a light pressure. I only apply more pressure once I get to the end of what I'm doing. I'm putting the finest details on. Because once you start to push in and flatten the tooth of that paper, you're then sort of stuck with what you do. As long as you keep it light, you have a lot of flexibility. You can add colour on top and change things quite easily. That is true, even swans do go through the ugly duckling stage. Oops, just move my drawing board. That's fine. Okay. See, that's a really nice reddy colour building there. And if I want more intensity, I add more layers. I don't press harder. It's an important thing to take on board with pencils. Just think light pressure, light pressure. And if you're not quite sure what light pressure means, or you're thinking of using light pressure but you still don't seem to be getting the results you want, I've done a little video as well on this channel just to give you a couple of exercises to help you have a little bit more clarity about what that means. And it's something when I, if we ever get to teach workshops again, something when I'm actually teaching, I've found is a really useful thing to set people up right at the beginning before we get started on the main piece, just to get, you know, even if you're working with pencil for a long time, just a little bit practicing with blends and pencil pressure, just helps everyone, reminds everyone how light they can be. And I think, you know, we can get a little hurried as well. A colour pencil is a slow process. It's a tiny little point. So we're not going to be able to work at the speed that we do with pastels or paints. It's easy to want to rush it by just, you know, you want black somewhere, so you just push really hard and get a nice thick layer of black in one go. But then that makes it slick and you get a shine on the paper and you can't put any more layers on top and it just looks a little bit odd. But that if you want that really realistic painterly effect that you can get with pencils, you're looking at thinking, is that a glazed oil painting or is it a coloured pencil drawing? It's lots and lots of layers. Okay, so that gives a nice purpley, sort of purpley, maroony brown, I suppose. And then to darken, I think a question earlier about colour wheels, I've now, rather than going back to darkening with the brown, I've got the dark indigo, which is one of the darkest blues in the polys, and that I'm going to add in to darkest shadows. And see how that's really deep, taking it away in its depth. And the good thing about doing a little exercise like this, it doesn't matter if you get the hair in the wrong place. It's more about understanding the process. So I'm looking at my work, at the reference, and I'm paying attention to it, but I'm not overly worrying if it's exactly accurate. It's giving it even more depth there. Is the purpose here to add line strokes beside adding more colour? I'm now working in the direction of hair growth. So that initial glaze, I just went flat across the whole thing. Now I'm not putting in so much individual hairs, but I'm also not going to go against the flow, because now that will start to show. So I'm thinking about, say, drawing the negative, what's behind the hairs, if that makes sense. So drawing in the shadows. And actually, this is one of the nice things about Pastelmat is being able to work dark to light, which for me feels a lot more intuitive than light to dark. If you're using a smoother paper, like a hot press watercolour paper or the Bristol boards, then you would tend to work the other way around, so you preserve your whites and then get darker, the same way you would do with watercolour painting. And I can do that with some subjects, but when I've got hair like this, I much prefer to get those darks in first and establish them that way. It's just much more intuitive for me. But say, we're all different in how we work. There's no absolute, which is brilliant, because it means there's room for all of us. It's just finding what works for you, what you feel comfortable, what gives you the results you're looking for. Oops. See, I'm starting to be a little bit more refined in those shadows, and that's starting. So I haven't really drawn lines, but I'm creating the lines of the hairs by putting in the shadow behind them. Whereas I think when you start drawing lots of hair, you tend to, you go in from the top first, so you're going from the lines, and then it all looks a bit flat and a bit odd. But by creating the depth first, it starts to look more real, more realistic. And even, you know, even though I want it to look real, it doesn't have to look photographically real to me. As long as it looks like it is actually hair and it belongs on an animal, then I'm not worried that it doesn't look like a photo. So that's certainly not my aim. Quite happy for it to have a few imperfections, which is really good because it always does. Okay, so that's dark in the shadows. So each layer is just putting another, still looking rough in that I can see a lot of the texture, but it's looking more hair-like, and I haven't really drawn any hairs yet. I haven't at all drawn any hairs. I've just built the structure of the paper, of the hair. So the next step is to start to create more vibrancy, because it's quite rich colours. So I've picked Sanguine. This is a lovely sort of pinky orange. It's not a really yellowy orange, it's got more red in it. But again, it's quite a nice sort of chestnutty colour, which works well for animals. So I'm looking at I'm not going to put this over the dark areas, I'm going to put this over the, and again, not over the brightest areas, but sort of over the mid-tones, and just graduate it towards the bright areas. So again, I'm still not actually drawing hairs, but as you go, you get more and more refined with where you're putting your pigment down. So by the end of it, you are sort of drawing hairs by default. yeah, I hope it does help with human hair actually. It would be, I really do need to do some people at some point, but so I keep going, oh no, I'd rather draw a tiger. But absolutely, you know, anyone who draws hair will tell you it's not about those fine little details, it's creating shapes. Look at it as shapes. And anything you're drawing really, if you can see the shapes and the values, that will give you a much better sense of realism than getting bogged down in those details. And I'm also just starting to see the tooth of the paper just start to smooth out a little bit. Is there another question? Oh, that's a good idea. I could change the title to Fur or Hair. Yes. So I'm learning this stuff. Some other things I've learned is to get my streaming up the right way. Don't press play before I want it to go, and all sorts of things this morning. So hopefully we're all learning this morning. I think I need a big gin after this. Okay. Again, where I want more saturation, just putting more layers down, just over and over. Because it's light, this paper will take so many layers. I think another artist friend of mine, Lisa Watkins, I think, if anybody's seen her channel, she did a little experiment with Pastelmat just to see how many layers it could take, and I think she got up to about 40 or 50 layers. So it really, if you keep them light, it really will take an awful lot. But you don't need to do anything like that if you don't want to. It just means the option is there if you really want to get those colours rich. There we go. And we all, you know, with colour and stuff, we all see colour differently, so have fun with it and don't worry too much about being exact in your colours. Go in the general ballpark and you get your values right and everything else will fall into place. Yeah, it's not 5 AM here though. That would be a good excuse if it was. There we go. Right, so next I'm going to go back to my burnt sienna, which is the reddy brown. Start to think a little bit more about the hairs as they curl. See how I'm drawing them across. Blend it all in. There you go. Dab those through. You are good to get up that early. 5:30 is very early. I'm glad I persisted and got it working. Okay, I'm just going to tone in some of those highlights again. And you know, every time you draw this stuff, there's going to be a bit of a difference to it. It's not one hard and fast rule. I know in my early days of art I was trying to work out my style and how I wanted to create and what medium I liked. This is years and years ago now. I used to feel very despondent because I couldn't find out the perfect method. I sort of thought other artists had this secret where they just knew how to do it every single time, and they had this like system that they went through. And because I couldn't find that, every piece I did was a bit different. I thought at that point that meant that I was doing something wrong, and I've now got a bit older and a bit more experienced and realise that actually we're all doing that all the time. We have our go-to solutions. We can certainly add to them and learn things, but essentially we're all just doing our best with each new piece. Okay, and then I'm going to put in some more. I'll get to Caput Mortem Violet to start to, so think about where the hairs, how they curl. The lightest areas are going to be the closest to you. So I'm not covering the shadows with this, but I'm just putting the base of the curls, and that will give a little bit more like in here. So make it, just give it that swirly sort of effect. So if you need to, pencils, just play around with them, do colour mixes, colour blends, see which colours work well with each other. And there's so much information nowadays, so many people are teaching tutorials, whether you want video ones or written ones. And when we get out of our lockdown and stuff, live workshops, there's so many different ways of learning nowadays. It's really, really good. It's the internet has had, obviously gets criticised a lot, but it's actually gives access to so much information. We need to utilise it well. See how, so this is looking quite rough, but hopefully giving a good enough idea. And to lose that crowdness and texture, it's just a matter of keep layering. And I'm showing you a process for this particular hair, but if you go through it, if you copied it exactly and it didn't look quite right, you just keep working on it. You just keep adding different layers. There we go. So really getting that nice sense of movement there. Oh, I'm glad it's been worth it. Sorry about the confusion at the beginning. And actually, I've got a kingfisher I'm going to draw next, because I can't go out taking reference photos at the moment. I actually treated myself to some lovely images from wildlife reference photos, and one of them happens to be a kingfisher. So I'm looking forward to drawing that. I haven't done one before, but I love that teal and that turquoise. So obviously drawing dogs and horses most of the time, you tend to get stuck in the same colour palette. So it's really nice to get to play with some different colours. Birds are really good for that. Well, not that I know a huge amount of birds, so I have to have a good reference photo. I can't fill in. Okay. So the colours are looking really nice and rich now. I'm really happy with those. But it's almost, again, it's gone back to looking a little bit flat because I've covered so much over the top. So I want to go back to my walnut brown. Just going to sharpen it quickly. I'll show you the sharpener in a sec if anybody's interested. Okay. So the sharpener I use, get it under there, is the, let's see that, Rapesco 64. They're not expensive. They're about £13 from Amazon or of any other arty shops. And they work really well, and you get a nice sharp point. I've got several of them, and they're all doing really well. Where was I? So I'm going to start to add in, go over the shadows with the walnut brown. And again, I'm still not actually putting hairs in, I'm just drawing around them. Yeah, I'm just thinking about putting in the shadows, building depth. And also noticing like this piece of hair goes over the top of this, so I'm just going to slightly darken the underneath, and that brings the hair on top forward. And again, the same there. Just bring that little clump forward. And sometimes you feel, you know, often we want to add white and to bring things forward, but actually quite often darkening the hair around the lighter areas will create a sense of lightness or brightness without needing to put loads of white on top. And that's what I will do, a white whiskers one as well, because that is sort of how I do it with those. And the whiskers I end up drawing look really bright white, but they're actually not. When you look closely, they're probably quite dirty grey, but because I've built the values around them, it helps them really stand out. So this is actually, you know, as far as a finished piece, this is for my personal preference, is still looking quite crude, but it does at least give you a sense of how I work and some ideas about what you might be able to do in your own. I've got to go through all those videos and work out which are the ones. Again, shadows are here, drawing it through. This area is a bit darker. I think I'd probably need a few more, maybe another glaze or something to fill that tooth in. That's a bit of a shadow coming around there. I think the more you observe as well the animals that you want to draw, or the subject you want to draw, the more you'll start to see. I think because I do a lot of horses, it's very easy to see when someone's drawn a horse that when they don't really know the animal, because often you'll find quite a lot of distortion in their faces. I mean, they're very hard to take photos of because they've got such long faces. It's very easy for the nose to look overly long and large, and you have tiny little ears and a really skinny neck, and that isn't actually, that's the camera's doing that. The horses aren't actually like that. So knowing your subject really well, observing your subject, how they move, their anatomy, also really add in to a sense of realism as you strive to improve what you can do. You see, I'm not, you know, I've created hair without really drawing hair. And although this is quite rough, it does look like hair. So I think the last thing I'm going to do is back to my ivory. Just going to sharpen that again. I haven't said too much. I've been trying not to swear as well, which I think I've managed when everything wasn't working. Okay, so now I'm actually going to draw hair. I've been saying don't. So I'm looking at my reference. Get under there again. Now you can start to see how all the little hairs move across that way. So this is what I'm going to start to put in now with this ivory. And this is the nice thing about Pastelmat, is it allows you to draw on top. So the sharp pencil, just put in teeny tiny little hairs. Again, we're not going to go over the whole thing, but it just gives you those little tweaks that can make it look, and you can spend quite a while doing this. I will just do a quick version so you can all get on with your days and go and get on with your own work. You can, just to give you the idea of how it all works. Okay, and if there's an area I want it to be really bright, just at this stage I can now just push it a little harder. There we go. There's some hair coming around there. Across there. Sort of notice how hair You know, it looks like it's all moving in the same direction. When you really start to observe, it's all going all over the place. But it's only these fine little bits that just want to get an idea of it. Here we go. See how it's really starting to look. So it's certainly not the perfect finish, and probably could go in and darken some of those shadows again, but it gives you that it has got a sense of movement. It's not looking overly rigid. Because the yellow is the ivory is quite yellow, again, my light flesh, and just really lightly glaze. It's such a tiny amount you're putting on here, it's not affecting anything else. Just toning it. See how that just worked there? It just brought it slightly more in harmony with the underneath layers. There we go. I think the last little thing I will do is a little bit of black. So before, I don't often use black. Sharper. I'll just put a little few spots of black in the very darkest points. This is really sparingly. And you can almost create hairs within the shadows with your black as well. See how that's quite possible to see. But you're not covering the whole of the shadow, you're just putting little tiny points in. Again, it all brings depth. It's really, if you really want to study anything, we get caught up in colour and texture, but study your values, really understand what values are. You know, do some graphite drawings, or work with your pencils, but maybe do a really limited palette, maybe 2 or 3 colours, and still try and get that sense of realism. And it will really help your work start to pop and give it depth, if that's what you're looking for, of course. You know, obviously there are plenty of people who just do beautiful colour work. You don't need that other look. There. Maybe just a little bit down here. And you also need, you know, I'm obviously got my reference to follow, but also need to evaluate your work independently. So at some point, especially when you get the end, you must put your reference away and purely look at what you've done. And you know, a good technique is, for me anyway, is to walk out of the room, come back in and look at it really quickly, and does it look how I want it to look? You can get a bit, you know, can't see the wood for the trees when you're working on something for a long time. And you want to, I'm just going to put a little bit more orange in there. And by going away from it and coming back, it can just jump out if there's something that's not quite right. This is what I mean about fiddling. Keep coming backwards and forwards. You just want to add a little bit more orange to it. That's maybe highlights looking a bit too highlighty, a bit too like he's been to the hairdressers. Got his T-section done. Then you want to just blend it in slightly. And another good way, if something's not right and you're not sure, is actually put it in a mirror as well, or just turn it upside down. That can sometimes help you work out what's wrong. There we go. So this isn't perfect by any stretch, but it's a good little exercise to do. It will help you understand a little bit more about value colour. It works. Well, I'm glad that helped. I've got a question here about how I would have put the black over the whole of the dark area of the shadow, and therefore flattened it. So yeah, I don't know how much you can see on the actual video, but just think with your black, it's just the really, really deepest points. And when you actually look at the reference, you know, initially those dark areas just look like a solid black block in the middle of there, but when you actually look in, you can see really subtle differences in hairs hidden away. And if you can start to think about that, capturing that, it will just thinking layers, 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 giving it depth. So it's something I really got my head around by doing, because I used to just draw into graphite until about 2015. Really, I had some pencils, but I'd never really thought of them as being a, you know, I used to use them for just sort of mock-ups and things. Never really thought of them as being an actual art medium as such until I started seeing some of the work that was being produced. And they really, because of that, all that grounding in graphite and value and structure and form, adding the colour then became quite a simple thing to do. Didn't mean I didn't have to work it, obviously, but I wasn't trying to do the whole lot in one go. I'd already got my head around quite a lot of stuff. And I've always, you know, I've always been someone who's always drawn since I was very little. It's not something I've just suddenly decided to do. Okay, so I think that pretty much wraps it up for this morning. And I'm glad we actually got to do it in the end. At one point, it's like, oh God, I'm just going to run away and not do this anymore. But no, it's worked. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea how I personally would approach spaniel fur, and how you can use your values to create texture and movement without actually thinking I've got to draw every single little fur. And you know, you can put as much detail on top. And for me, this is still, you know, it's still quite crude. It could keep going with more and more layers, but actually I think I've covered enough to give you an idea of how I work and what I would do. Yep, I think that's it. Well, thank you very much for listening and asking questions. This will be on, hopefully, if I don't delete it, will be on YouTube, my channel. And I will be attempting to produce some more videos very shortly as well, and also another live, which hopefully will go a little bit better than this one. Okay, thank you very much. Bye bye.